Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit Down. Look, you know it. They're on the shirt. They're on the TV. You know what we're talking about. Why don't you pull up a chair? Take a seat. We're getting ready to dive in spoiler-filled into episode 5 of WandaVision. And like I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, which perfect time to point out, if you haven't watched the episode, you don't want any spoilers, this is not the video to be on. Get out of here. Go check out the non-spoiler review, which you can see right up there. Go watch the episode, then come back to this one, where you can find out that, much like I said in my non-spoiler review, the show just gets better every single week. There's no other way to put it, man. Like, every week, I just get pulled deeper and deeper into this story. I get pulled deeper and deeper into conspiracy theories and any and everything that has to do with WandaVision. Every week, I just find myself rewatching all of the episodes more than one time, like in a full sitting, just watching them all the way through. And if it continues to do what it's doing, which is just deliver its best episode every week it drops something, I really do think we are watching maybe one of the best things that Kevin Feige and Marvel have ever put out inside of the cinematic universe. The show's so impressive. It's doing so many things, and there's so many things that we think it's doing that it might not be doing. It could be doing other things. I feel pretty strongly that a certain thing is going on that we haven't talked about here, and we will talk about as we dive into the spoiler review. But even then, I'm like, is it too obvious? There's been some stuff recently. And last week, we got a trailer that certainly showed a bunch of things from this episode, but showed things that I would assume come from at least the next episode, if not the next 2 episodes. And then we also had this Marvel poster come out. We had a new poster, and the background of the poster is kind of like floral wallpaper. However, dead center in the middle of the poster, there's a little image on that wallpaper that does not look floral. And when you really get in there, you can kind of outline the shape and face of a specific character that a lot of people have been hinting at, theorizing about, that I haven't touched on personally yet. That could be the one that's behind all of this. His name, of course, is Mephisto. Mephisto, named after Mephistopheles when he was created by Stan Lee, is Marvel's devil, essentially. He looks like the devil. He is an eternal, immortal, demonic entity. And he has a power set that kind of resembles some things that we're seeing inside of WandaVision. Specifically, not his super strength or shape-shifting, but his illusion projection, his memory manipulation, and his altering of time. All things that seemingly are things that Wanda can do. But all, of course, would tie directly into Mephisto. And if he is behind all of this, a lot of things would make sense, specifically because of the power set that he has. And he ties into the history of Wanda and Vision in a big, bad way. We've talked about the kids, Billy and Tommy, who become Wiccan and Speed. But what we haven't talked about is where they've come from. And in the comics, when entities are created, or at least around Wanda and Vision, it seems to go off of brain waves or pieces of a soul. Some other physical entity helps produce things that are created inside of the world of Wanda and Vision. For instance, Wonder Man's brainwaves were used to create Vision. One of the reasons why Wanda, after divorcing Vision in the comics, believes she ended up with Wonder Man for a while is because he reminded her of Vision. When they split, Wanda gives Vision a gem that holds a piece of her brainwaves to create a family for himself, which he does in the Vision comic, which the show clearly pulls from, at least from the suburb aspects. And then when you have the boys, the reason that they disappear and they eventually, get wiped from the world because they're not real before being reincarnated as other people's children, is that when Wanda creates them, she uses a piece of Mephisto's soul, which ultimately leads to the ending of them. And it was one of those things where, you know that as a comic reader, but I don't know. I was so tied in and locked in on the Hydra stuff and the Strucker stuff that I wasn't thinking Mephisto. Pretty hard not to after this week, but that image on that poster looks very much like Mephisto's face, and it just seems too in our faces, too obvious for something that Kevin Feige would do, unless he meant to do it. So, like, I have this feeling that, like, this is a guy who's one of the smartest filmmakers in the business. He's one of the smartest comic book people in the business. I mean, the reason that the Marvel Cinematic Universe works as well as it does is because Kevin Feige understands the ins and outs of the comics and where the storylines come from and how you can adapt them to do really cool things like this. And it feels like it's too in our faces. Like, it almost feels like Kevin Feige's trying to misdirect us, or at least that's how I was feeling before this episode. One of the main reasons I hadn't talked about Mephisto yet, because it just seemed like it was almost being forced down our throats. And after watching this episode, I have to bring him up because it is really feeling like somebody has the power to do some of the things that have led us to this point. And while I think Strucker trying to get Wanda to create children, to take those children, could be a really, really legitimate theory, I don't think he's got any power that could help Wanda in this situation where Mephisto could. And after watching it, I was like, it really feels like he could be involved. And maybe Hydra's involved here too. I'm not going to lie to you guys. This director, Tyler Hayward, he doesn't seem very trustworthy, and he proves pretty quickly in this episode that he is not super trustworthy. Maybe, I mean, it would be kind of redundant to have another agent inside of something like S.W.O.R.D be a Hydra agent, but I don't know. Maybe they're working with everything. However, I just thought it was necessary to bring up because of the poster, some of the things that we saw in that trailer footage that came out from this episode, and clearly ones that are coming. Not necessarily that hinted more at Mephisto, but like, I don't know. I was just getting the vibe where it's like I have to mention. But, again, I almost feel like Feige's trying to force us to look that way to maybe not see something else coming. So let's dive into the episode after 7.5 minutes of talking about a character that we maybe meet at the end of this episode. Ooh, yeah, I told you there's a reason we're talking about Mephisto. But like I said, I wrote everything down because I want to go through this whole ep because there's so much in here. And we started off following last week, maybe the best cold open we've gotten anything related to Marvel, the repiecing together of Monica Rambeau, and that whole hospital sequence was just mind-blowing. So you go, how do you start the episode that follows that cold open? Well, you don't get one that's as visually striking and as impactful as that scene was. But we do get to see Wanda and Vision being parents for the first time. And they're going through the struggles that pretty much all parents go through when they have kids. Specifically, they're in a stretch where the kids haven't been sleeping and they're crying a lot. And as soon as we come in, we know that we're in the 80s sitcom. Just by the dress, the hairstyle, and these are kind of clips that we saw in the trailer, where we were like, oh, they're going to have the babies when they're playing around in the 80s. And they won't stop crying for anything, man. They're trying every single thing they can. And nothing's working. And then just when you need some help, who shows up but good old Agnes? In her jazzercise aerobics, she was like, I was on my way to jazzercise, and I heard that you guys were having some sleeping issues over here. And immediately, Vision is skeptical. And Vision's been skeptical on things all season. In this episode, he is more skeptical than we've ever seen him before, and it's so much fun to watch Paul Bettany work through this episode. But immediately he's like, how did you hear about like the kids not sleep? She's like, with my ears, obviously, like you can hear him outside. Let me come in and help. And of course, when she does come in, Vision's not, the person version of Vision. So he like, grabs a pillow to cover his face and change. And then, she's like, here, let me rock the children. And, Vision is all like, where were you last? What have you washed your hands? The kids, they're maybe you shouldn't do it. And this is the moment in the episode where you get to find out one of the things I was thinking about right away is, will the show go back to the sitcom format following the break from the sitcom last week to show us the outside world? Or once you show us the outside world, it's pretty much impossible to go back to that sitcom unless you blend everything together. And that's what we get in this episode. We get that sitcom episode to watch, and we get to see elements of it, but we get to see stuff outside of Westview, and we get to see things that we typically don't see happen in Westview. And when Vision is like, actually, Agnes, don't help with the kids, she breaks character and looks right at Wanda and goes, do you want to reset that? Or, should we take it from the top? What do you want to do here? And we obviously know that Wanda has been editing the footage for the outside world. And it was kind of a weird break, because it's like, why that moment do you want to reset, re-tee up to get you to interact with the children? Unless Agnes has a very important role to do with those children. This is the beginnings of the feeling that I was getting watching this episode, where it's like, maybe Mephisto is at play here. Maybe there is a bigger bad looking over everything, and Agnes, and I also think maybe Herb could be that big bad's two other kind of like henchmen, so to speak, to keep everything in Westview peachy keen. And what we see here is the one thing that, again, we also haven't talked about is a piece of Agatha's ensemble every episode, what she's wearing in a wardrobe. There's that brooch, that pin that she's got on, and it seems like there are 3 figures in that pin. And if there are 3 figures, you figure the overall big bad, we'll say for now Mephisto. Herself would be a second. Who's the third? And I know a lot of people have speculated Dottie, because Dottie's been kind of weird, but one of the things I haven't been able to shake has been the fact that Herb and Agnes were talking. And they were talking when Vision was around, but talking on their own about things going on inside of Westview from a not under the spell of Westview, from the legitimate perspective of what's actually happening in Westview. If there's a third party, the only person that we've seen kind of break character and not completely skits out, although we saw it a little bit, is Herb. Could it be Agatha Harkness, as many have thought, and somebody else? Maybe her familiar, Ebony? I don't know why, but Ebony popped into my mind for things that happened later on in the episode. I was like, who pals around with Agatha other than her familiar? But Herb does have a driver's license, so he is a resident of Westview, and he's a real person, so that could be wrong. But it does feel like he is not as under the spell as everybody else. Keep your eye on that. But nevertheless, why would she break where she does? Because Vision is stopping her from getting to the kids. Maybe whoever is in charge of all of this, or is really behind everything, like I had theorized with Strucker, wants these kids. And maybe Agnes is one of the people who is supposed to help nurture or get them to raise to a place where they're supposed to be. Maybe she's supposed to have some kind of influence on them. Maybe she's the reason that they can age up. After the break, right, and she breaks, Vision picks up on all of this and kind of pulls Wanda over. And it's like, did you not just see the whole thing where Agnes just kind of broke out we were in some kind of a show? And he doesn't say this, but he's like, did you not, what's going on there? And Wanda kind of plays dumb, She's like, well, she's just trying to help, whatever, it's not a big deal. And Vision rightfully is confused. But while they're talking, Agnes starts spritzing stuff over the boys. And she goes lavender. It's supposed to, calm things down. And she's like, her husband, Ralph, uses it all the time. She's like, you can't calm down this wild animal. She's doing jazzercise as she's rocking the cribs. But that mist that she sprayed, could it be magical mist? Could it be something that helps give the boys powers? Because not long after she mists them, the crying stops, and when Vision and Wanda go to look, they're not in the cribs. They're behind them as about 5-year-old boys, basically. They're kids now. And they will age up multiple times. Well, one other time in the show later on. It was one of those things where it's like, did Agnes help that happen? Is Agnes supposed to be helping these kids grow up faster? Maybe because whoever is ultimately behind everything wants those kids. That has been the one part of my theory that I refuse to waver on. Whether it's Strucker or it's Mephisto or if it's somebody else. The kids are the linchpin in this whole thing. And I think Agnes could very well be Agatha Harkness being made responsible to get these kids to the age they need to be for whoever is going to take them. That was the kind of vibe I got with, like, the little misting. The other thing that she does, too, is a good joke. She's like, we're looking for your brown liquor. And Vision is still, this is when he's kind of questioning everything. She's like, not for me, for the kids. So, like, what kind of babysitter do you think I am? And obviously, for those that are unaware, brown liquor was used a lot of times, specifically when kids are teething, to kind of numb their mouths to help them not cry as much. I wouldn't recommend doing it personally, but it's one of those things that back, in the day was a pretty common thing to be done. So it's kind of funny that Agnes kind of points that out. But like I said, then the kids kind of pop up and our cold open song, the show song starts. And it's driving me nuts because it bases itself around a portrait. And I feel like there's an 80s sitcom that had a portrait in it. But I went through a whole bunch of openings from the 80s sitcoms and I could not find the portrait. However, I did find lots of other ties to 80s sitcoms just in that opening. One, the super melodramatic and like serious both tone and words inside the opening theme song this time. Well, it had a far more serious vibe. And a lot of 80s sitcoms, while they were sitcoms and they were there for laughs, they did play on the emotions really, really big. And some of the theme songs were kind of more emotional, more serious. And immediately, as soon as I heard the tone, I was like, oh man, I feel like I'm like in that like Wonder Years growing pains vibe of like, not like we're having like a fun time, but like we're going to have a reflective experience about who we are. And the show is very reflective this episode. Which is kind of cool. Like I like how the story sometimes lines up with things that, sitcoms in the era they're playing in would play with. So like you kind of have that musical vibe going, and then there's actual imagery that actually pulls right out of something like Growing Pains. We see like kind of snapshots of Vision as a baby growing up, Wanda as a baby growing up, the boys as infants growing up in pictures. Something that was done on Growing Pains. That shot of Wanda and Vision running through the grass, like up toward the camera, kind of shaky. It's pulled right out of Full House, as is the end of the song where they're kind of on the blanket in front of the gazebo. Obviously, in Full House, there's no... is there a gazebo? I don't think there's a gazebo. But they're kind of like out in like a field, and just like the vibe, I'm like screaming Full House. So like I said, the 80s sitcom stuff, that's my lane. Most of the sitcoms I grew up watching were from the 80s. Things like I said, Growing Pains, Full House, Wonder Years... Family Matters. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but so many of them started, even the ones that played into the 90s, like Full House and Family Matters, started in the 80s, and certainly in the theme song alone, they capture so much. But like I said, the heaviness and some of the weighty content and subject matter from 80s sitcoms brings in here some really weighty sitcom moments that we will get to later. But after we have our song, like I said, we were gonna have to mesh the world of like the sitcoms and like the real world stuff. Once we were introduced to Monica Rambeau outside of Westview, kind of hard to just go back to the sitcom, and we don't. After the open, we go to Monica, who we see is having tests done, and we're hearing a conversation. We're hearing director Hayward talking to her, asking her to describe what she felt, and she said the first thing comes out of her mouth is pain. And you're wondering, maybe it's like on the way out, like, oh, when Wanda like hit her and threw, like what was, no, it's her going in. The minute she gets sucked in, she immediately feels pain. Then she hears Wanda's voice and then feels like she's drowning in what she can only describe as grief. Like, she is drowning in Wanda's grief as Wanda kind of shuts her out to become Geraldine, so to speak. But pain was the big key word there. Like, what Wanda is doing is actually physically harming the people inside of Westview. That's a key element because, yes, we should have sympathy for Wanda, but Wanda is the big bad that we know of right now. There might be someone ultimately in charge of this whole experiment, but the stuff that's going on inside of Westview is being controlled by Wanda, which makes her a really good antagonist. And it makes you kind of question who Wanda is. And after, we hear like those things come out of Monica, she talks to Darcy and Jimmy. They give her some clothes, like we got a briefing. They introduce her to Darcy and Monica to each other. Someone comes in and is like, we need to do those scans again because the scan they took is blank and the results on the blood drawing are coming up inconclusive. Monica's like, no, we're not going to do that. I need to get back to work. And we go, and Hayward is having kind of like a briefing, and he himself mentions the idea of like, where did Wanda come from? He actually has this really funny moment with Jimmy Woo, where Jimmy's kind of talking about Wanda and refers to her as Wanda a couple times. Goes, she doesn't have like a funny name, like a secret alias, like no funny names or anything like that. And we all know her funny name to be Scarlet Witch, but Scarlet Witch has never been uttered in the MCU. So Jimmy is like, no, man, she doesn't have any names. Her name's Wanda, but she doesn't have a nickname, no funny names, no nothing. I was like, that's kind of a funny, like, meta thing to point out. And there's, much as there is weighty stuff, there's a lot of meta stuff in this episode. I like pointing out, like, yeah, she doesn't have an alias like the other Avengers do. And if you remember where she started, after her parents are killed, her and Pietro become activists in Sokovia and eventually voluntarily sign up to join Hydra, and then they're experimented on with the Mind Stone, and then they're given powers. But at the beginning of all of this, Wanda was a Hydra agent. And Wanda was a villain. So maybe she never stopped being those things. Hayward kind of throws that out there, and it is an interesting concept because a lot of destruction kind of follows Wanda. You have obviously everything that went down in Germany as well as in Lagos when she exploded the bomb higher up into the building rather than on the ground. And obviously from our perspective, she's saving people, and then an accident happens. Is it an accident? It's one of these things where it's like, I don't even know if I trust Hayward, but him just mentioning it in the show makes you go, should we question everything Wanda has ever done? Like, has Wanda been a sleeper agent this whole time? I think that's a little far-fetched. I think we're far more in that realm of, like, she had a mental break. Obviously, Monica feels that grief that Wanda is trying to deal with. And that maybe kind of plays into this. But should we question? Maybe we should. Maybe they'll play with that. But I kind of like having it just put out there into the world because you do have to remember where Wanda came from. As they go through, the rest of the briefing, we basically get to the place where Hayward is like, all right, everybody go. Now, speaking of Hayward, Sky got one of those, like, I can't shake the feeling that there is something not right with Hayward. I don't know if it's straight up bad guy stuff, but I don't know if we trust Hayward. And he does some things later on in the episode that certainly align with, like, can we trust him? And if indeed it's Mephisto behind the Maximoff anomaly, then maybe Hydra, if they're involved, is involved on the other side. And there's a lot of hexagons in Hayward's office. The pictures on his wall actually line up into a hexagon shape. I was watching a video where someone actually zoomed in on the carpet, and the carpet is a bunch of hexagons, which, again, like, unless it's just to point out the hex, which Darcy calls everything now because of the hexagonal shapes. Could be that, but if it wasn't that, The only other place a hexagon really pops up in Marvel is in the A.I.M logo. Maybe that's where that element is. I'm telling you, it could all be involved in the show. But I'm telling you, though, definitely less trustworthy is this Hayward guy. And speaking of that untrustworthiness, he gives his team a big piece of information that he's been sitting on for 9 days. When I heard this in the show, I was like, what? How is this the first time that we're hearing this? Shouldn't that be like where all of this started for S.W.O.R.D? Like, shouldn't S.W.O.R.D have been investigating everything Wanda and Vision the minute he reveals this? And this is one of those other things that didn't hit me immediately. I kind of took it as more of a reality break last week. But then after posting my videos and kind of talking to my buddy and some other people and watching some stuff online, there's a real big feeling that, like, the Vision in the show is Vision's actual corpse. And I was like, dude, that's dark, man. Like, I get this storyline is dark. Like, if they're adapting House of M, like, it's dark. And there are dark elements to comics. But, like, actually physically resurrecting the corpse of Vision seemed a little too dark. Apparently not, because it is Vision's corpse. That's the big piece of information that Hayward drops on us in this episode, is that 9 days prior to all this Westview stuff, Wanda shows up at S.W.O.R.D, just clears anything in her path to get to Vision's corpse, steals it, takes it out of S.W.O.R.D. We don't see her steal it, because the last shot that we see from the video footage that Hayward shows is her entering the room where Vision is. And there's like multiple tables, and it's kind of fuzzy and grainy, and when you stop and you go in, every single table is a piece of Vision. Now, Vision, when he was killed by Thanos, just had the stone ripped out of his head and looked exactly like the Vision that we've seen in that shot from last episode where he becomes like the corpse version of him. He wasn't in pieces, though. S.W.O.R.D was deconstructing, like, you know, Hayward mentions that they're now, you know, involved with like AI and nanotechnology, and it looks like S.W.O.R.D is breaking into Vision to learn things about him, how maybe to recreate him. Who knows? But he is in all different pieces. So, like, you think about the Wanda break, and it's like Wanda is mentally having a tough time dealing with Vision being dead. Now she goes to find the body of Vision to, you know, for her is a being. Vision should be treated like any other human being would, you know, the way that she treats him. To the rest of the world, Vision is a machine, and S.W.O.R.D has dissected him. You want to talk about a spot for a mental break to happen if it wasn't right after watching Thanos, after you kill him, then Thanos kills him, then you get snapped away, then you get brought back, then you have a funeral and you got to like deal with all of these things, and the funeral of course is for Tony, not for Vision, but like then you finally go to maybe that's what she was after. Maybe she wants to give Vision the send off, the burial that Tony has. Who knows? But now you go in there and he's being dissected for science. That could be a thing that breaks a person to do something wild. And it's, to this point, I think the thing that points the biggest amount of mistrust in Hayward. Like, you've known about this for over a week. Isn't that where you'd start? Like, the minute you know that Wanda is inside this anomaly, and you show up after, you know, not Geraldine, but after Monica gets pulled in to become Geraldine, what do you think the first thing you'd say to Jimmy Woo and your people? Like, hey, so this happened. Maybe something weird's going on here. But no, he holds it till now and claims that, you know, he was just allowed to release it, you know. But, like, it is you want to talk about dark, this show is going to dark places, and at this point, I think we can assume that it's gonna go to maybe some of the darkest places we've seen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and maybe Phase 4 is going to be a dark phase, because it definitely feels like the Multiverse of Madness could also be a dark movie. And I'm all about it. I love it. Like, when I heard the corpse thing, I was like, that would be cool, but I don't know. Now it's real, and I'm like, all right, if we're willing to go there, where else are we willing to go? And, like, I should have figured that it was the corpse, because, like, we did zombie Iron Man in the last Spider-Man movie, but I digress. Anyway, Hayward is going to wrap up the briefing, send his people out, and then we jump back into Westview, and you see the two boys are about to sink, and they're talking about something. And just based on the fact that there's the amount of bubbles that we see in the sink, none of that is on the boys, and just the way they're talking, you're like, I bet you they've got a puppy. And Wanda comes in and immediately is like, something fishy's going on here, move. Sure enough, there's a dog, stray dog, found outside, no collar. They want to keep it. And she's like, it probably has no... Oh, it doesn't have a collar. Oh, maybe. I don't know, boys. And this is the beginning of some meta conversations. This is like one of the most meta episodes I think we've had yet. But there are conversations specifically that Wanda has with the boys. Once here, when talking about getting a dog, and then later in the episode, after the dog dies, spoilers, we'll talk about that. But she has another conversation. Both conversations almost feel like conversations she is having with herself. And, you know, there's this idea that I've had from day one that, like, WandaVision was going to deal with the mental breakdown that Wanda has post-Endgame. What if she has a full split? Like, you notice... Like, we know she's in control. We heard Monica say that last week, but I've been rewatching these episodes a lot. Like, when I have free time, I rewatch everything. I rewatched everything before this. I woke up at like 1 o'clock and couldn't get back to sleep, so I was like, screw it, put WandaVision on for the next, hour and a half, 2 hours, and then go right into it. And, like, there are so many moments where Wanda seems confused by what's going on. Like, being in a sitcom is weird to her. And then there are other times where she seems like she is completely lucid and like in control of everything, like we saw with Monica. But if she's had that break, maybe she does have two sets of personalities or two parts of herself inside of herself, or maybe she had to give up part of herself to recreate Vision. There's a moment when Vision is talking to her, when all this stuff's going on with Agnes in the cold open, and he's like, Wanda, we're usually so much of the same mind. Or maybe it was later in the episode, but at some point in the episode he says, like, usually we're so much of the same mind, but I don't know about this. Actually, it might be coming up right here after this conversation. But when he says that, it is one of those things that I've always thought. You don't have the Mind Stone to inject life back into Vision. How do you reanimate the corpse? How do you give him Vision the way we know him? Maybe she had to give up a part of herself. In the comics, every time we create something, we're utilizing something else, right? Like Vision is created with some of the brain waves of Wonder Man, which is funny because later when Wanda and Vision split, Wanda ends up with Wonder Man, and her, thought process as to why is because he reminds her of Vision, because Vision was created from that. She then gives Vision a piece of her brainwaves in like a gem form to allow him to create a significant other, which ultimately leads to his family. But his wife is created from the brainwaves of Scarlet Witch Wanda. The boys created by piece of Mephisto's soul. So maybe she had to give up part of herself. Maybe that caused some of this confusion. But it does seem like she's having conversations that are more important to her than they are to the kids. And this first one is about the dog and how it is a big responsibility taking care of something that's alive. And while the boys would be taking care of a dog, Wanda is literally responsible for thousands of people. And we know that she is inflicting pain on these people based on what Monica said. And maybe she's struggling with that. Maybe that's an inner turmoil that she's having when she sees that dog kind of brings her back into a little bit of lucidness and is like, hey, it's really hard to do this, like maybe we should not be doing this. And then I think Vision comes in and is like, what's going on? Oh, there's a dog. And then he literally has a moment where he's like, yeah, or she's like, why is your face? He's like, I just have a feeling that like somebody might stop by. And then Agnes comes in with a dog house and he goes randomly always with the thing that we need right at that moment. And Vision clearly is starting to piece together that something is really, really wrong here. But Agnes comes in and she's like, I saw the dog. You thought you guys could use this. puts it on the table, and I think it's at that point where, they're like, can we keep the dog? Can we keep the dog? And it's like, we need a collar, and magically creates a collar right in front of Agnes. Now, Agnes doesn't see it, but Vision sees Wanda do it in front of it. He's like, what are you doing? This isn't what we talked about. And that's where he goes, we're usually of the same mind. The minute he said that, I was like, I think Wanda used a piece of herself to inject life back into Vision. Maybe that's what's leading to the some of the stuff that's going on mental trauma-wise in her head right now. But she's like, honey, come on. Like, she didn't notice that the kid's aged to 5 out of nowhere. Like, I don't think this is a big deal. As we're sitting there, these 5-year-olds are like, well, you know what? Me and your dad think that you can't have a dog till you're 10. And the minute Wanda says 10, the boys kind of like look at each other, I guess. We can't see them. We're just seeing Wanda and Vision react. And they're both like, wait a minute, no. Now they're 10 years old. They age up right in front of everybody. Like, everybody. Agnes is there, WandaVision, and they're just like, okay, well, that's a thing. And Agnes is not fazed by any of this. Again, I don't think... I think we've all known that Agnes is not part of Westview. But Herb is. And I think Herb is more lucid than the other people the way Agnes is, just based on that conversation between them. I can't shake it. But anyway, they ultimately decide to keep the dog, and we go back outside, and you got Monica, Jimmy, and Darcy, and they're kind of just talking. This is where Darcy drops that she's named it the Hex because of the hexagonal shape of, around the town. And I'm really digging like this little team of Monica and Jimmy and Darcy, because they all bring something different to the table, right? Like, they've all had their own experiences with different heroes in the cinematic universe. So seeing them team up and kind of work through things together is fun. And as they're kind of doing that, like, we hear Monica go, "Oh, I know, like an aerospace engineer that we can hit up." Talking about some of the stuff they're starting to talk about, and there's no payoff in the episode, but the way the music sounded and the way that Monica originally sounded, you were like, they're bringing somebody in. Now, this is where I'm going to have to ask for your help, because I don't know the ins and outs of Monica Rambeau's history that well, where I could go, who's an aerospace engineer that she knows from the comics that could be this person that she's referring to. For a minute, I was like, oh, maybe she's going to reach out to, like, Captain Marvel, but not too long after, they're talking about how powerful Wanda could theoretically be, and she's like, well, I mean, she would have killed Thanos if, like, he hadn't, caused that siege. And I love that, like, everybody knows the entire history of that event, even though nobody else was there. Like, everybody knows what happened in upstate New York, and she's like, look, Wanda would have killed Thanos if he didn't call for that charge of all his people, and she had to stop. So, like, maybe she is as powerful as we think. And, it's like no one else had that opportunity. And, Jimmy's like, well, I think Captain Marvel did. I was like, oh, man, they said her name out loud. Like, she's gonna freaking show up in this show. And my head's gonna explode by the end of this episode. And then Monica's entire face and feeling change is like, we're not talking about her. Clearly, there is a rift between Monica Rambeau and Captain Marvel. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's she holds resentment because of the death of her mom. Maybe it was, maybe the cancer stemmed from stuff working with Captain Marvel. Who knows? But clearly her aerospace person is not Captain Marvel. But if you guys have any ideas who that could be, please let me know down below in the comments. Because, like I said, I don't know her history super, super well. But I think that we're bringing in a comic book character with that text message that Monica sends, and maybe Captain Marvel could show up at some point anyway. Who knows? But it certainly seems like there's a rift between them. Then, as they're kind of talking and working through things, Darcy mentions something about, like, the sets and the wardrobe and everything, because Jimmy asks if, who could the kids be? And she's like, look, I know some things look like they're like an illusion or whatever on the screen, but when you're inside of Westview, everything in there is real. Like, those kids are Wanda's kids. It happened. I helped deliver them type deal. And, then they're kind of talking about, like, sets, props, designs for all the episodes or whatnot. And you hear Monica just kind of stops and goes, wait, Darcy, what did you say about like sets and design? She's like, wardrobe? She's like, wardrobe. And she goes to what she came out of the Hex wearing, which was not what she went in wearing. And when they go to look at it, she kind of runs a quick test. She's like, I knew it. Goes, she grabs Jimmy's gun before he can even respond. She's like, hey, what are you doing? Shoots 3 bullets. All of them hit and drop to the floor. The pants became bulletproof because she was wearing a Kevlar vest. And when she tested the pants, most of the makeup of the pants was Kevlar. Meaning that while she can manipulate and change reality, if she physically is changing something, Wanda is not destroying the properties of what she is changing. She is just changing its physical appearance, but everything that makes up that thing still exists. So those pants, now a Kevlar vest. Kind of these and like I said, I like watching Jimmy and Darcy and Monica kind of try to dissect and figure these things out as we're trying to figure things out. Almost like they're our set of eyeballs. So I love all that, and like the other thing too is like hearing Monica talk about how she could have killed Thanos if she wanted to, like hints at the fact that she's only like one of several Omega level superhumans, and her power set. I've said this many times before, and I've been waiting and dying for the MCU to dissect it. Wanda's the most powerful Avenger in the game, and that's also another moment when Jimmy brings up Captain Marvel and is like, hey, didn't she get her powers from an Infinity Stone too? Now I'm wondering if Captain Marvel is clearly what we've seen, one of the strongest, most powerful. She could be theoretically an Omega level human, superhuman. Wanda is, and if both of them have their powers stem from stones, it makes you wonder, do we have an Omega level superhuman for every Infinity Stone? And does that mean that maybe Star-Lord, having come in contact with the Power Stone, maybe some of that rubbed off on him more than he realizes? We know that he was obviously born of a god, and once ego is dealt with, he loses that ability. But maybe the Power Stone has given him powers. I don't know, but it seems like they're hinting at the stones could have impact reverberations past Endgame into the superpowers that some of our characters have. And maybe the people who have powers influenced by the stones are your Omega level superhumans in the MCU. I don't know, man. These are all just things that are spitballing off of my head as I'm doing this live. But that's something to certainly keep an eye on. But after, you kind of wrap up with that group, we jump back into Westview, and the boys are, talking about the dog or whatever, and they're like, oh man, we gotta go, show Dad this. And Wanda's like, oh, well, Dad's at work. And they're like, why is he at work? She's like, well, it's, he goes to work. And they're like, it's Saturday. She's like, no, it's not. It's Monday. And she's like, the kids are like, no, it's not. And she's like, look, Dad just needed a break. He needed to go do some him time because he's out of line, basically. And you're hearing in Wanda's tone that, like, Vision stepped out of line, so Mommy put Vision in punishment. He has to go to work and, like, recollect himself. And what's odd, or funny, is that Wanda thinks that doing that will bring Vision back into the fold where she can manipulate or control him better. But in sending him away to go have his own time is actually going to allow Vision to learn or figure out more, because once she kind of tells the kids, like, sometimes mommies and daddies fight, but they still love you and they still love each other, and like, things will be fine. But Dad had to basically like go cool off, so he went to work. He needed something to focus on, to occupy his time with, so that he could chill out. But ironically, is back at work, Vision is setting up computers in the office. And he goes over to help Norm set up his, and you see an email come through. And you're like, ooh, an email. And they kind of go through like what an email actually means, electronic piece of mail. Norm has a bit where he's like, oh, if we're going to open up this email, I'm going to need my envelope cutter so we can cut it. And Vision's like, no, we don't have to do that. And he opens it, and it's from S.W.O.R.D. Very strange. Like, all of a sudden, there's this email from S.W.O.R.D. on the computer, and you're like, huh, how does this get here? Did, like, Vision, inadvertently intercept it? Did just turning on computers, a piece of technology that hasn't been in Westview yet, intercept it, much like, the way the radio was able to intercept Jimmy calling out to it. All these things are kind of weird. And you're like, how did they get here? Before you can think about that, you're like, what does it say? And Norm starts to read it out loud, and then the entire room reads it out loud around Vision, who's silent. Almost in that mantra chant for like, we are, for the children, in this kind of chant, and then they all start cracking up and laughing. And this is where you find out why and how this email got into Westview. As Vision touches the computer, you see the yellow glow of his powers kind of outline it, and then the computer turns off. And then immediately after that, he does something else. Vision wakes the computer up to a degree, which is how the email gets in. And then he puts the computer back, not awake, like back into the world of Westview. Well, as soon as he figures out that he can do that, he jumps up and he, bam, hits Norm on the temples, and Norm wakes up and freaks out. Like, mentions also that, like, he's in pain and that it's all Wanda. Like, nothing they do is theirs. And that he has a family and he has to call his sister because who's taking care of their parents? Now, if you get into the real nitty-gritty of a show like WandaVision, or you get into the Easter eggs that Marvel's putting in there, I pick up a bunch of them. I don't pick up all of them. And there was a bunch of Easter eggs last week because outside of Agnes, every single form that's been filled out for every person inside of Westview that Jimmy has put up on the board is 100% legible in episode 2. And in Norm's notes, it actually mentions an interaction that Vision has with Norm that we hadn't seen. One of these things that kind of tips to the fact that S.W.O.R.D has seen lost episodes. We saw, obviously, the shot of Geraldine where Wanda and Agnes are behind her talking. That didn't happen in any of our episodes. So I don't know if it was intentionally supposed to be on the note at the time in the last episode where this information is, because it would seem like things are kind of out of order. But I think that's just kind of like we'll have it in there because it kind of tips to it. Now we'll show you what that scene actually is. And when he wakes him up, the notes had mentioned Vision woke up Norm. Norm mentioned his family, fearful of them, fearful for everybody in Westview. Don't know if we can trust the safety of the people inside of Westview anymore. And then Vision put him back down and he became Norm again. So Vision, boom, like the computer, wakes up Norm. Norm has this freak out. Boom, he puts Norm back and Norm goes back to being normal. But watching Vision wake up a character inside of Westview, and it's one of those things like we saw this in the trailers with Agnes when he wakes her up and she's like, you're supposed to be dead. I don't know why it didn't jump out at me in the trailer, but the moment he does it to Norm, I was like, Vision is Layla Miller. Who is Layla Miller, you ask? I told you this is a huge episode. There was so much going on. Layla Miller is a blonde young woman in the House of M that Wolverine comes across. Wolverine is the only person in the House of M at the beginning when Wanda changes all of reality that remembers his entire past. Everybody else has forgot it. And he basically needs to wake up people to help him. And he comes across this girl, Layla Miller, and realizes that it's her. She has a mutant power that wakes people up out of Wanda's, trance that she's put them in. So Wolverine and Layla go around together and start to assemble and grab more X-Men to kind of help out or whatnot. And you wake all of these people up. So now you're taking that kind of little bit of storyline from the House of M that belonged to Wolverine and this girl Layla Miller and giving it to Vision. And what's cool is because we know Vision is real. We know the show confirmed that his corpse was stolen. Since Vision's real, like, he is the linchpin to figuring it all out. Like, if Vision figures it all out, and I think Darcy even says, like, if that's Vision's corpse and she's reanimated him, what happens when he figures out what's actually going on? Like, what's he gonna do? And all episode long, we've been watching Vision kind of start to piece things together as he starts to notice more and more, and he realizes he can wake people up, put people back under Wanda's trance, and it's fun to kind of watch him get to be the hero, knowing now for sure that he's not just something that Wanda created, but is actually physically the Vision from before. So it's one of those things that I think we'll have to watch as we see what Vision does. And the rest of the episode also kind of keys us into the fact that Vision is up to some things, or is going to be up to some things, or could be the key to saving everything. But then after we get that, it's like you have this kind of like really big moment followed that, where we jump back over to Wanda, and she's got the kids or whatever, and all of a sudden the dog like runs over the door and is barking, freaking out. And I'm like, Mom, there's like something's scaring him. So she gets up and she's like, stay here. She opens the door. Dog takes off, and you can hear a noise outside. And the boys come on over, and Monica goes and grabs an 80s piece of like a drone from the 80s. So her whole idea is like, if you bring something that should be able to fit in, maybe that's how we can cross over. That's how we can keep seeing things. So sure enough, it works. On the 80s broadcast feed or wave that they're intercepting, this is able to transmit images. And inside, they're able to find Wanda. You see Wanda, the two boys, and they're looking up. And Darcy is like, well, she changed the camera. She cut it. So like you can't see the drone in the episode, because it's focused on her. She's still, manipulating what is going out in these transmissions, who they're for, why they're being transmitted, who knows. Could it be, again, part of, Wanda's good part of her psyche, trying to lay things out to help her get out of this if she isn't in full control of everything that's going on. But, like, while they're there, Monica tries to talk to her. And she's like, Wanda, it's Monica. Just want to talk. And Monica, Wanda's eyes go red, and immediately Hayward is like, kind of looks at one guy, who then looks at the other guy. They all kind of nod, and Monica loses control of it, and you just hear Hayward. He's like, "Take the shot." She's like, "Take the shot? What do you? There's no gun on there." He's like, "Take the shot." And then you see Wanda's kind of face change a little bit, and everything goes black, and then alarms start going off. There's a perimeter breach. It's one of the coolest moments in the whole episode. You see someone walking. Like, you can see like a shadow walking, and it looks like they're dragging something. You're like, oh my god, is Wanda dragging a huge, like, it doesn't take long. It looks like her normal, like, outfit that we've seen in the movies, like with her trench coat and whatnot. It's kind of the outline. It looks like she's holding something, like, she have a person? Like, what? She's dragging the drone. It is Wanda. She comes out, and she's in her Wanda gear. She sounds like Wanda. She's got the Sokovian accent back, and she basically tells everybody off. She's like, look, y'all need to, is this yours? You need to take it back. Get out of here. And, Hayward is like, what do you, they've got all the S.W.O.R.D agents have their lasers, scopes set on, like, Wanda's chest. And he's like, Wanda, we can't just go. Like, you're holding all these 1,000 plus people hostage inside this town. And she goes, meta conversations in this episode everywhere. She goes, yeah, well, I'm not the one holding the guns, director. And then, like, while she's doing that, you're seeing her form like an energy ball, and she goes as she walks back into Westview. Changes the basically warps the minds of all of his agents, who then beeline on him. And then as she goes in, kind of reverberate, it almost looks like she hits the energy field in a way that turns it bright red, almost like, now you can't walk in here. Like, I just closed it off for you. Like, that's what that change is. And all of that, of course, is preempted by a conversation that Monica has with her, where Monica is like, Wanda, look, this whole conversation, there's so much going on. She's like, you brought me in. I delivered your babies. Like, she's like, I didn't know that the drone was on, but you know that. Like, deep down, you let me into your world. You trusted me to deliver your children. Like, and you're a telepath. Like, you knew who I was from jump. Somewhere deep down, you know that that's true. Like, let us help you. And, Wanda ultimately is like, screw that. She does the thing. She goes back in and, like I said, kind of reinforces the barrier where I don't think you're going to be able to get in anymore. Like, Monica was able to just kind of put her hand in and get sucked. Now I think if you try, like, it's probably like a wall. But the conversation that's going on there, twofold. One, Monica's side of it. A part of you knows the truth, that there's good in there. Kind of speaks again to that split of, like, is there a good and a bad Wanda inside of Wanda? Is more of the good inside of Vision than inside the current Wanda? I don't know. The other thing, though, is that moment when she says to Hayward, but I'm not the one holding the guns. Like, I don't have the gun. Like, I can't do it. Meaning, like, all of his men have the guns. But, like, is she speaking in the bigger terms? Like, is that good part of Wanda trying to reach Monica in a moment going, I might be doing things, but I'm not the one holding the gun. Like, maybe there's someone holding a gun to her head who's forcing her to do things. We get a little bit more clarity toward the end of the episode after she goes back in as well. But there's this moment where, like, all the guns turn on Hayward and you're like, yes, get him. Because, like, even in the show, like, I think Jimmy says something to Darcy where he's like, I try to look at the good. And she's like, I know, Hayward's a dick. Like, we all know this. And then like, she goes back in and the force field shows up. That mind wipe stops and they kind of all put their weapons down and everything goes back to normal. Then we jump back inside of Westview. Well, it's funny because, like, at that point in the episode, I'm like, oh my gosh, is it over? Like, that was the fastest 30 minutes, like, ever. And then we get our commercial finally. I'm like, oh, we're only halfway through, a little bit more than halfway through, but we get a commercial here for, very fittingly for the 80s, it's for paper towels. You just get a spill. These paper towels, you got to use, like, the whole roll just to clean up this. But with Lagos paper towels, kind of like Bounty or something like that in the real world, one piece will get all of this. It absorbs better. Fitting for this era, because that was a big thing. Like, mid-late 80s and the 90s, I mean, even now, when you watch these paper towel commercials, like, look how much more absorption this towel has than another one. Lagos, of course, would be that place from Wanda's past where the explosion happened in Civil War and kind of led to everything that went down in Civil War. And that kind of finally confirmed for me, and this is one of those other things that's made me start thinking Mephisto, is that my thoughts on Hydra, those commercials kind of hinting at Hydra, or hinting at potential, things in the world in the future, while also being references to the past. Well, Lagos is a place. So unless Lagos is gonna be something important in the future, I don't think the commercials are doing a dual thing. They're just pointing to Wanda's history. Each one of them has a piece that relates to something from Wanda's traumatic past. Lagos, of course, being that moment. And then after that commercial is over, we come back into the world of Westview, and we get some more meta conversations, because Wanda and the boys are now looking for the dog, which went missing. And they come across Agnes's house, and you hear him go, "Oh, Sparky!" And Agnes comes up, she's like, "I'm so sorry," and she's holding the dog, but it's wrapped. She's like, "I wanted to kind of like completely cover him up or whatever. He got into my azalea bush, and I don't know how many leaves he ate, but I was too late." And in reality, real world, the azalea bush and flower is poisonous to dogs, can cause a lot of internal stomach issues, and I guess if enough are eaten, could kill a dog. However, in that moment, the minute she said eating leaves, I was like, well, if Agnes is Agatha Harkness, did we just get a nod to the Wandagore tree? The Wandagore tree is a tree in the comics that we see in the Vision comic. It was a tree that Wanda had given to Vision as a gift for the house, and Wanda had gotten it from Agatha as a gift. And in the world of magic, if you feed, it's super tricky. You can eat a leaf or a petal, and then you can but basically the Wandagore tree allows you to see the future, but there's a whole process that involves eating the leaves and then eating the stomach of the thing that eats the leaves and dies. And the comics, it's her familiar Ebony. She feeds the petals, Ebony dies, she eats Ebony's insides, and then can see the future. I'm not saying that that's what's going on here. I'm not saying that Agnes is about to eat this dog because we find out later Vision buried it. But mentioning a tree or a bush or a plant that has leaves that an animal eats and then dies from, tied to a character that we think is Agatha Harkness, I think that might be a nod to the Wandagore tree. and maybe the answer to the end of this, or a flash to the potential future, maybe something in Multiverse of Madness, might come from that tree and might be used later on by Agatha or maybe Wanda or somebody. But Azalea Bush and the dog just randomly dying, if that's Agatha Harkness and there are things about plants and animals that die, I'm just throwing it out there. Again, a lot of things going on here. Maybe that's what that is. But the other thing is the conversation that Wanda then has with the boys. Because it looks like they're about to age up again. And Wanda's like, no, stop. And they're like, what do you mean, stop what? She's like, do not age up out of this. This is an important life lesson that you have to take in. And they're like, well, Mom, you can fix anything. Like, you can fix dead. Like, fix it. And, like, the minute they say fix dead, I don't know if necessarily everybody inside of, like, Westview understands that Vision is dead or that's his corpse, but like the kids clearly know that Vision's corpse is Vision's corpse, and Wanda made Vision come back. Like, fix our damn dog. And then she has this like serious moment. That's another one of these things with these like 80s sitcoms. They bring in the emotional, man. Like, I remember being a kid sometimes, like they talk about like serious stuff, you know, like AIDS or guns or bullying. I mean, it's far smaller on the scale in that respect, but I mean, like all of these serious things that could influence adults or the kids in these shows, they'd flush it full out and full on talk about it. And that happens multiple times in this episode, including this moment where Wanda basically tells the kids, like, death is forever. Like, you can't change death. And she even pauses because she knows deep down that she has cheated death by bringing Vision back. But she's like, you can't. You have to learn this lesson, that pain is something that happens and that you have to deal with. And it's another one of these moments where it's like, it feels like Wanda is talking to Wanda. Like, you have to deal with the pain, and the way that you want to deal with the pain is not the right way to deal with the pain. It's not going to go away. Vision is dead. Like, wake up out of this is almost how that conversation feels. But nevertheless, Wanda kind of convinces the kids, like, this is part of the world, you know. And then Vision shows up, and he's like, oh, boys. And he comes, you know, brings them in. And we get the wipe to the end of the episode. Boys are asleep. Vision's coming in from burying the dog. You know, even says, like, not often that you bury a dog, like, get a dog and bury a dog on the same day. And as he's washing his hands, you know, Wanda's like, well, things move fast out here in the suburbs. And he's like, no, Wanda. He's like, Wanda, no, like, I talked to Norm today. She stops. She's like, okay, you talked to Norm. He's like, no. I talked to Norm in a way where I brought out the actual person that is in there. And I talked to that guy outside of your control. And Vision basically just calls her out. It's like, look, I know that you're doing something to these people. And outside of your control, they're all very scared, and like, you're hurting people in here, Wanda. Like, this is not okay. And Wanda's like, just stop it, Vision. Like, that's whatever. And he's like, look, you can't control me the way you control the others. She goes, oh, can I? And like, there are these moments in this show where this is where I think like there's so much going on in Wanda's head, because there are moments where she reacts to things like, how did that happen? Or why am I in this sitcom reality? And then there are moments where, like, she is completely lucid and, like, aware that she's in control. Like, oh, I can't control you the way I control everybody else? Laugh track, please. Roll those credits. Give me the theme music to I'm going to bed. And Vision's like, no, you're not just going to do this so that you can go to bed so that we can wake up to everything changed again. Like, there is something seriously wrong here. And this is maybe my favorite moment of the episode, because as he's having this really dramatic and explosive kind of response to what Wanda just said and did, you're hearing the end of the sitcom episode. So like, there's this lightedness underneath, like, Vision getting real serious. And as Wanda goes through the door and Vision follows her, we cut from where they are to the outside, and now the credits are gone. The music just drops out, and Vision is laying into Wanda, man. He's like, you are hurting people, and that is not okay. And he starts to levitate, and then Wanda turns her powers on. You get the glowing in her hands. She levitates up, and he's like, this is not okay. This is not what we talked about. You're doing magic in front of Agnes. You're controlling people. You're hurting people. And she looks at me and goes, "You've never talked to me this way before." And he's like, Before when? Like, before when, Wanda? I don't remember anything from before Westview, and I am freaking out. Like, I am legitimately scared." And as she kind of brings him down, it feels like we're about to have this conversation. And is going to be very, very important to Wanda and the resolution of the show. And right as they're about to get into it, the doorbell rings. And Vision just shoots her this look. And she's like, "I didn't do it." Because anytime they are close to spatting, or there needs to be an intervention or an interruption of some kind, it always happens. And now Vision is pieced together that when it happens, it's because Wanda wants it to happen. And there's like a legitimate moment where Wanda's like, "You honestly think that I'm in control of all of this? That I'm in control?" She's like, "There are thousands of people out here, Wanda. Like, why are there no kids in the town?" She's like, "There are kids." Like, the playground is empty every day. I never see the kids." And she's like, "You really think that I'm doing all of this? Like, you think that I'm controlling all these people so that, I'm controlling when they decide to go to the dentist and when they decide to mow the lawn or do laundry or chore? Like, that's insane." And you're getting to, like, the core of what this conversation needs to be, of like, okay, Wanda, you are doing some of this. What's really going on? Who's really doing this, and why is it happening? And there's even a moment where she's like, "I didn't even know it was happening at first." Now you're starting to piece all these things together. Like, Wanda stole Vision's body. Wanda came out of Westview and told everybody, like, in Wanda, like, Sokovian accent, like, "I'm doing this. This is my home. Get the hell out of here." But then she's talking to Vision. It's like, "You really think I'm in control of all of this? Like, I didn't even know how this started." And that was kind of more to what Monica and myself were kind of theorizing with, where it was like, that grief just kind of broke Wanda, and this was the result. Now Wanda's saying that maybe that's not what happened. I guess there is so much conflicting information coming out of Wanda's mouth. You don't know what to believe and what not to believe. And right as you think we're finally going to get to the core root of this, like maybe she's going to talk about how somebody else is doing this or has created this for her to do, the doorbell rings. The minute the doorbell rings, you're like, "No, it's not Agnes," because Agnes would just walk right in. And then Wanda opens the door and you see Wanda's face. The minute I saw Wanda's face, I was like, Quicksilver. Quicksilver is outside. Finally, I've been theorizing and assuming and figuring that at some point Quicksilver would show up. If she could recreate Vision, she could bring back Quicksilver. But then there's this thing, right, where like when I started to think about Quicksilver, it's like, well, you got Aaron Taylor Johnson. However, also cast in the show, well, Aaron Taylor Johnson's name has not been anywhere in the casting. But cast in the show, Evan Peters, someone who people theorize could maybe be Mephisto. It's also the Quicksilver from the X-Men movies and the Fox universe of Marvel stuff. So, like, it could be either one of them. And if it's Evan Peters, man, like, what are you gonna really be doing here, Feige? Like, are you gonna start folding in these realities in the show if he shows up? Is it gonna be really him? Who knows? So as soon as you see her face, you're like, it's Quicksilver. And then they show you the back of the head, and I'm like, it's Aaron Taylor Johnson, dude. That's his haircut. Like, I know what Evan Peters' head looks like. I know what Aaron Taylor Johnson's head looks like. And I know what those haircuts look like. And that's Aaron Taylor Johnson's freaking head. And then Vision comes up, and he's like, who is this? And I don't know if she says it's my brother, but like, or if they just cut to him and he says something. But when they cut to him, sure as hell, Evan Peters. Bravo, Kevin Feige. You knew that we would all be thinking Aaron Taylor Johnson. So you designed the wig to look exactly like the back of Aaron Taylor Johnson's head from Age of Ultron. And then to spin it around, you have the haircut or the wig that Evan Peters is wearing. It was a perfect fake out because you saw the back of his head. I was like, that's Aaron Taylor Johnson. That is not Evan Peters. And then it's Evan Peters. And he comes in and he's got the accent. He's like, hey, man, you're not going to give your baby bro a hug? Like, I come in? And he's like, what's up with, like, what does he call him? He calls him, like, light bulb or something. Like, he calls some Vision some kind of, like, machine reference almost, I think. I don't know. He calls him a name, but he's coming in jokey, funny. Like, I'm the long-lost brother that's been here. Now I'm here. And that's where the episode ends. And you're just like, wait, I don't... So, actually, there's a really funny moment where, as it's happening, Darcy is watching it happen, and she sees him, and she goes, "Oh my gosh, she recast Pietro?" And you're like, and Wanda is thrown off because she's like, she looks like, I don't know this person, and then when she's like, Pietro, he's like, who else is it? And she gives him a hug. You're like, again, it's this idea that like Wanda sometimes seems to be completely in control of things, and at other times she seems lost and confused by things. And clearly this is not her version of her brother. So what does that mean? Well, there's a couple things. It could be Feige starting to open up the multiverse, and somehow that collapsing into Wanda's reality. That seems a little bit far-fetched. I think ultimately, like we've talked about in the past, that's what this could become. That's where we could be going, is everything Wanda is doing is creating these realities that might collapse in. What I think is more likely is that this is not Quicksilver from the Fox universe. I think this is a super, super, super meta pull where you have the guy who played Quicksilver play Quicksilver in the WandaVision TV show. But if Wanda didn't bring Pietro there at that moment to stop that conversation with Vision, maybe the person who's really in charge behind the scenes wanted to stop that conversation, because what they're after is not done yet. Those kids are not grown up enough to be what I need these kids to be, so I'll show up myself. And this is where it really feels like it could be Mephisto. Mephisto has shape-shifting abilities and illusion power. And if he is pulling the strings, and Vision is about to actually figure it out because he has no control over Vision, maybe Mephisto's got to get himself into this story to make things work the way that he needs them to work out. You know, in a more of, well, you know, it's just one of those situations where, like, nobody else can do it. You just got to do it yourself. Maybe that's what's going on here. I think that if it's Mephisto or whoever it is, that's who Evan Peters is. Evan Peters is our big bad, or he is directly sent in by our big bad. In some way, that character is going to tie into who the overall big bad is. And don't get it twisted. That doesn't mean that Wanda's not one of the big bads here. I do think, much like the comic, there is somebody else pulling the strings. You know, like Quicksilver gave her the idea to alter reality in the comic, and it really feels like kind of Magneto is pulling some strings while Wanda is doing all these things. If that's what you're setting up, I think Evan Peters ties to whoever that is, whoever it be, whether it's Strucker, or at this point for me it feels like it's more likely that's Mephisto, whether he is Mephisto or is one of his minions or something like that. In some way, shape, or form, Quicksilver, played by Evan Peters, is going to be the linchpin to whoever I think the real big bad is. So, holy cow, man, that is a massive episode. There's so much going on. I mean, and like I said, even though I feel like that is what is happening, I'm not 100% positive. That could be Quicksilver. That could be Pietro. That could be the Evan Peters from the X-Men movies. I don't know. That's the genius of this show, and the genius of, like I said, Kevin Feige and Marvel. I think he's throwing some things right at us point blank. Like that poster wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a, oops, we hid something in the poster and people found it right away. Like, it was so blatantly obviously there. I can't imagine that someone who wasn't Kevin Feige was responsible for the placement of that image that looked like Mephisto's head. Is he trying to veer us to look over here so he can really do what he wants to do over here? I have no idea. But that's all I got for you after this episode. There's a lot. I told you there's a lot in this freaking episode. And we got lots of answers, man. Like, we know for sure. Wanda knows that she's in control of at least certain elements. Maybe she knows that she's in control of all of it, and she wants this just normal life with Vision so bad that she continues to lie to Vision about being fully in control of it. But, like, we definitely know that she is aware of something because of the conversation she had with the S.W.O.R.D folks. But now, with Evan Peters showing up as Pietro, I got 8 million more questions. So, woo! thank you for hanging out in this really, really long-winded episode. There were, like I said, so much to break down, and if the rest of this season is like this, are we going to be having some lengthy conversations? But for now, lengthy conversating is done by this guy. Lengthy conversating for you is the time it is, man. What'd you think of this episode? What'd you think of what I thought of this episode? Or any of my theories, any of my thoughts in line with yours? This is the spoiler, man. So if you didn't get to spoil it before, you spoil everything. Anything you want to talk about down below in the comments section, man. Is Wanda in control? Is someone controlling Wanda? Is this something that we haven't even thought of yet? Do you think Mephisto is involved? Is that who Evan Peters is? Anything you're thinking that's going on in WandaVision after watching episode 5, down below in the comments section, man. Let me know, like I said, what you're thinking, what I'm thinking, how'd I do? Are you in line with me? Do you think I'm totally off base? If you know who Monica Rambeau texted, you think you know that aerospace engineer, who that is, let me know all that down below. Look forward to talking to you guys down there. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with the old C-Man every Friday morning as we watch and then break down WandaVision like real big time. You want to be here for all of that, and you haven't yet, or you just like what we're doing and you haven't yet, you want to show a little love, support, show that you dig what's going on over here at the Cinema Sit Down, I urge you, man, come join us every week. Be part of the club. Be part of the Cinema Sit Down. C-Maniac Nation, baby. You want to be part of C-Maniac Nation? Jump over there. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that little bell if you want those alerts. And until next time, for the C-Man's Cinema Sit Down. I don't even want to think about how long we'll be talking next week, but I can't wait. And until then, or the next time that we talk, for the Cinema Sit Down, I've been the C-Man, baby, and I am signing off. Peace. Well, as I live and breathe, you still here? Check out a video like this one, or this one, and hit the subscribe button so you can get alerts and check out everything the C-Man's got at the Cinema Sit Down.